What happens when an appraisal comes back low? Hey everyone, it's Austin Solomon, the Solomon Group at Coldwell Banker. Welcome to this week's episode of the Real Wausau Real Estate Show. Today we're going to talk about what is an appraisal, what happens when it comes back low or less than the purchase price, and how as a buyer or a seller can you navigate through a low appraisal. So number one, what is an appraisal? An appraisal is an expert estimate of the value of something. Here we're talking about the value of a home, right? There's two purposes. As a buyer, normally it's a condition to the offer or a contingency, something that the lender requires because as the lender, they're borrowing you money, typically a large amount, and they want to make sure that the home is worth what they're borrowing you. So if you default, you don't make your payments, the bank can go back, sell the property, and recoup their loss. Secondly, it's used as a protection to the buyer, right? So if you make an offer on a home contingent to the appraisal or that expert estimate of value, you're making it contingent to be at least at the purchase price of the home. The value of the appraisal needs to be at least the purchase price or what you're paying for the home. So that's your contingency or your protection, right? Now, what happens if an appraisal comes back low? Well, if we look to the offer to purchase and the terms of the offer, if you don't modify those terms, right, there's three things that can happen when the appraisal comes back low or less than the purchase price. The buyer can make up the difference. The seller can drop the price to meet the appraised value, or some combination of both. As an example, let's say that a buyer makes an offer on a home for $200,000, and they have the home appraised, and the appraisal comes back at $190,000. The buyer can, number one, they can say, you know what, I'm okay with that. It's not ideal, but I can make it work. You know, the appraisal came back at $190. I know I offered $200. I'll just cover the difference, and we'll go to closing. All is well, right? So the buyer covers the difference. Number two, the buyer can submit a copy of the appraisal and a notice to the seller saying, hey, here's the appraisal at $190. Here's our notice saying that we object to the appraisal value. As a seller, you either drop the price to $190 or the deal's off, right? To which the seller at that point could decide, do they want to move forward at the new price or cancel the deal? Now, as a caution to a buyer, once you do that, the seller can cancel the deal. So, you know, if you really like the house, that might not be the best option right off the gate. Number three, the third option is some form of negotiation or middle ground, right? So this is going back to our example. Let's say that at a $200,000 purchase price and a $190 appraisal, the buyer might tell the seller, you know what, let's split the difference. Let's make the price $195 and I'll move forward, right? Seller, you drop the price $5,000. I'll bring the additional $5,000 to closing, above and beyond what's required of me for my down payment and closing costs, right? And then we'll amend the offer to $195. We'll call it good, right? So those are the scenarios that can happen. And the reason that I'm bringing this up is because with the market the way it is right now, prices are going up very quickly. Buyers are competing, sometimes going $10,000, $20,000, $30,000 over asking. And the buyer and seller need to understand the appraisal and know how to navigate that process. And as a buyer, there's cases where you need to address the appraisal issue up front with the seller before even making the offer or as part of the offer. So what do I mean? Let's give another example. So home comes on the market at $184,900. You see the home, you love it, and then you find out that a lot of other people love it too. There's 7 offers in on the home. So you make your offer and you're like, wow, 7 offers, it's $184,900, I really like it. I'm going to go $205,000, $20,000 over asking. But you have an appraisal contingency. Now, that leaves a big question mark for the seller because these buyers are going $20,000 over asking, but they have an appraisal condition. What if the appraisal comes back at the asking price, $184,900? Will the buyers be only willing to pay the $184,900? So the question that the seller is going to ask is this $20,000 over asking really that good? Well, there's an appraisal in there. right? Because the appraisal's in there, we don't really know. We won't know until the appraisal is done. That's a big question mark for the seller. Plus, the appraisal's not done until about halfway through the process. Does the seller really want to go down that path when they don't know what's going to happen, right? So as a buyer, what you might do is address this question up front in the offer, outline that, hey, in the event that the appraisal comes back low, the buyer will pay $10,000 towards the deficit. If the appraisal comes back low as a buyer, I'll pay $10,000 over the appraisal, not to exceed the purchase price, right? So that's you telling the seller up front that, hey, I'm going $20,000 over asking. I have this appraisal in there, but let me tell you what, as a buyer, if the appraisal comes back low, I'm willing to go at least $10,000 more than the appraisal value. So in our example, again, asking price is $184.9. I'm offering $205. You tell the seller, hey, I'll cover at least $10K of deficit. If the appraisal comes back at $185, the seller knows they're getting at least $195. If the appraisal comes back at $195 or more, they're still getting the $205. The most that the seller gets is $205, right? Now, you might say, Austin, as a buyer, why would I want to do that? Pay $10,000 over the appraisal. Well, if there's 7 offers on the house and you want the home, you're going to have to get creative. You're going to have to do something to make your offer stand out. So thank you for tuning in to this week's episode of The Real. With the market the way it is, it's of the utmost importance to understand the appraisal as a buyer and a seller and navigate the appraisal in an appropriate way. Thanks for tuning in to this week's episode of The Real.